Cross up to Brisbane, we'll catch up with the member for Hinkler, Keith Pitt. How you going, Keith?
Mate, it's great to be with you and great to be with your viewers.
Now, it's all happening in Queensland now. You've got a pro-development, pro-resources state government, very enthusiastic about the Adani mine going ahead. But as a result of that, suggestions that Jackie Trad might be knocked off come the next election by the Greens. Well, she's not green left enough for the Greens? They want to knock her off?
Well, what a turnaround, Chris. I mean, the Premier Palaszczuk can't find reverse gear quick enough. And I think if they had a couple of extra reverses, they'd be winding those up as well. But there's been a really clear message, particularly from regional Queensland, that they want jobs, they support the resources industry. It's a position that we've held very strongly on our side of politics. And I know that Premier Palaszczuk and others are now trying to play catch-up. But I don't think people out there will be fooled. They know that they're not true believers. They know they really don't support the resources sector. And I think at the next state election next October in 2020, they will send a very resounding message to the state Labor government.
Now, tell me about power prices. Isn't there movement upwards of power prices in Queensland at the moment? And what's driving that? What are the repercussions there?
Well, we have this ridiculous situation where even though the state government owns pretty much everything, in regional Queensland north of Gympie, they own the only retailer in town, all of the poles and wires and 70% of the generators, and yet they've now gone back to commercial customers, large customers, and said they're going to place a demand charge on them of 48.5 cents a kilowatt hour. Now, what that means is it's actually cheaper to hire in diesel generators and run diesel fuel than it is to take power from the network. I mean, what a ridiculous proposition, and it puts them in a really difficult financial position.
This has always been the argument against Queensland and indeed the other state-owned electricity assets when they were state-owned, that state governments used to gouge them, used to use them to raise money, and certainly that accusation's been made of Queensland. It's the counter-argument to that is that through privatisation you get a bit of competition, but we've seen some price gouging from the private companies as well. Do you think the LNP on the state scene in Queensland should look at privatisation in that state?
What they've put forward as a potential state government, as the current state opposition, is that they would diversify the generator assets back into 3 government-owned corporations to provide more competition. They will look at retail competition into the regions, is my understanding.
But if they're all owned by the government, it's hardly competition if you've got various state-owned electricity companies competing against each other.
Well, I see your point, Chris, but this is exactly the position that they were in previously. And the power prices climbed enormously since those generators were combined in terms of their 2 local businesses. In fact, they were explicitly mentioned in the ACCC report that they should be divested into 3 government-owned corporations to provide generation competition in terms of the wholesale price. So I think there's very strong support for making that change, and Deb Frecklington and the team are certainly making that argument. But right now, we've got people that just can't pay their commercial bill, and it's going to go up enormously. I mean, I've got a foundry which is expecting an increase of $1 million a year. Now, that is really unhelpful if you want to try and keep manufacturing in this country.
Well, Josh Frydenberg and the government you're part of are looking to bring in these big stick legislation to throw their weight around in the energy sector, threaten divestment if they don't play ball. Presumably, they could use that legislation against state-owned entities in Queensland.
And that's correct, but we want to be very, very clear. That would be to divest into another government-owned corporation, not into a privately owned company or forced sale. I mean, we've got this scare campaign running up here from the unions and others already. That is not the reality of the proposed big stick legislation. But we need to have some method to crack down on these gentailers who are making billions of dollars. And they're taking it from the consumers of this country. They're taking it from the businesses of this country. And I think there needs to be a real structural change. I mean, if you get a 300 or 400% increase in your profits over a short period of time, I think very clearly there's some questions to be asked. And if you don't want to play ball, we'll bring you to the table, and that's what the big stick legislation is for.
It shows how complex this issue is, though, because in the southern states we've seen big investment in renewables, forcing out some coal retailers, and that's helped put the upward pressure on prices, as well as some of the sort of cartel behaviour of the retailers. In Queensland, you haven't really had that, have you? You don't have a lot of renewable energy, and you do have a pretty healthy levels of supply, yet consumers are still being screwed.
Well, I think there's 2 points to be made. The first one is that the Queensland State Government has increased their profit margin into the billions. It's about $1.5 billion. Not that many years ago, it was sort of $280, $300 million. So it is an electricity tax on consumers and on business. And the second point is they are going after this crazy renewable energy target without a reliability standard. I think this is the fundamental problem. If you want to install generating capacity, it needs to be generating capacity that works all of the time. If it is variable and intermittent, then you need to have sufficient backup. Now, that costs more money. It hasn't been included in the current standards. And what happens is you simply displace your coal-fired power stations. They go broke and disappear, and the lights go out. We know exactly what's happening in the southern states. We certainly don't want it in Queensland.
Now, we're seeing that globally the demand for coal is increasing. Obviously, coal-fired generators being built around the world. All the speculation, I suppose, activists have pushed around the place that coal's on the way out is being disproven in the latest figures. Yet you're pushing for this inquiry into nuclear energy. Doesn't it make sense in a place like Queensland, certainly New South Wales as well, to push for more coal generation if we've got supply crises rather than nuclear at this stage?
Chris, I've always been technology agnostic, but this is a technology that's utilised by more than 30 countries around the world, and I think we need to look at what those options are. No one's calling for reactors to be built in my hometown. I see it was suggested on Sky this morning by a political commentator. The reality about this is we are looking for an inquiry. I think the technology has moved. There are new options. I think they should be investigated so we can make an informed decision. And anything around the nuclear industry is decades in the planning. It is not days or weeks or months. It is 20 years. So in terms of the future of this country and the utilisation of our resources, the Commonwealth's resources, in the best interests of the people of this nation, well, I think we should at least be able to have that adult conversation with the Australian people. But unfortunately, there are those commentators who are straight out with the scare campaign. I
don't think you could even explore for uranium in Queensland. Isn't it one of the states where even uranium exploration is banned?
Yeah, there is a restriction in Queensland, and this is the silliness. I mean, we are happy to sell our uranium and our coal and, you know, all of our bauxite and iron ore right around the world for other organisations and other countries and other companies to get an advantage from. And yet we want to limit the opportunities for our people, for commercial businesses in our country. I think this is just one of the fundamental problems we have with what we are currently doing in the resources sector. Well, yes, it provides a whole heap of support in royalties, but we need to make changes for on-the-ground manufacturing, research, and particularly for smart manufacturing. If we were serious about secure energy in this country and while reducing emissions, we'd be building a nuclear reactor in the Port Augusta area of South Australia. It's just down the road from Roxby Downs, where they supply 40% of the world's uranium, and they have all the electricity transmission assets there from the coal-fired stations they shut down, and they're on the coast. But South Australia looked at it and they got squeamish. It was too hard for them to approach. So I think you're right. We've got to keep studying this, look at this, and at least get rid of the legal restraints or constraints on those questions. So it's a fascinating issue. No doubt energy debate is going to kick off and liven up when Parliament gets back next month. Now, Keith, you and I off air last week had a bet on the state of origin. I'm a bit of a state of origin novice. I backed the Blues, of course. We had a bottle of Queensland's finest on it. So you took the honours. I'll put that on the public record. What's the state of origin standard play here? Do I just throw you the bottle, or do we go double or nothing for Sunday's game? Oh, I'm happy to go double or nothing. I'm always happy to back the Queensland team. And as a novice, I guess, in origin, Chris, never back someone other than Queensland at Suncorp Stadium in Brisbane. Yeah. Look, I look forward to the contest. I think it'll be a great match. It's just a fantastic spectacle and great to watch. Yeah, it was great stuff. Let's go double or nothing then. Thanks for joining us, Keith Pitt. Absolutely.